Hello, everybody. So excited that you're here. My name is Sophie Ziegler. I run comms for Library Juice Academy and Library Juice Press and all the other wonderful things that we have going on. And so I get to welcome you to today's webinar. I'm very, very, very excited about this. Very excited about our guest. And I'm eager to get out of the way so that our guest can speak. So let me just say a couple of things really quickly about Library Juice Academy, just in case you're not familiar with us. We offer a range of online professional development courses for librarians and library staff and all of us sort of in the library ecosystem. We do asynchronous learning, usually over a 4-week period. We offer certificates, we offer CEUs and PDHs for those of us collecting those. We have institutional bundle pricing available, and we try to be an affordable alternative to conference attendance for those of us looking to learn all the things that we didn't know we needed to know until we got the job. We also run Library Juice Press, so a sister organization in which we publish books and journals that examine theoretical and practical issues in librarianship. We look at these from a critical perspective and usually for an audience of practicing librarians, those of us in library school. Library Juice Press is an imprint of Litwin Books, so you can find more about us at litwinbooks.com. And speaking of being on the internet, we are in all the places that you like to browse, all the places that you like to scroll. So do find Library Juice Academy on Blue Sky and Mastodon and Facebook, and Instagram, YouTube, where this video will live in the near future. That is everything I wanted to say. So happy now to stop sharing and pass it off to our host.
Awesome. Give me just a second to get my sharing set up and make sure I can see the chat and all of that good stuff. All right. Hello. I am Angela Pashia. I was a academic librarian for 12 years. Now I am an ICF accredited coach and I work with library leaders to help build leadership skills. And also happy International Workers' Day, May Day. I'm excited to see so many of y'all here taking time out of your day to learn more about coaching skills for leaders. So today I'm going to define exactly what I mean by coaching and some of the benefits of this style of leadership, and then give an overview of the coaching mindset, which is the foundation that you build your skills on top of, and then an overview of those coaching skills. Since this is just an overview and there's only so much that I can fit into our time together today, I'll also be sure to include information at the end of the presentation about where you can learn more about this approach. I believe that libraries would become much better spaces for workers if more library leaders developed more of a coaching mindset and learned some core coaching skills. So as you listen today, please keep in mind the question of how you can apply this to your own context and what support you can find within your network to help you embrace more of a coaching mindset and start actually using some of these skills. I know how easy it is to attend a webinar or a presentation, walk away with some great ideas, go back to work, and some stuff starts coming at you, and you wind up leaving those ideas sitting on a shelf, collecting dust somewhere until they get buried under more great ideas that you never get around to actually using. Like I said, I was a librarian for 12 years. I've been there, done that. So I'm going to ask again at the end, how will you take at least one baby step over the coming week toward actually putting some of this into practice? And one logistical note, please feel free to pop any questions that come up for you along the way in the chat. It might take me a minute to see it because I'm not always great at splitting my attention, but I'll do my best to pay attention. All right. There we go. So when you think about coaching, what comes to mind for you? So this is one of those terms that's used in a lot of different ways. And it's important to be clear on what exactly we're talking about before I start telling you how great it is. Because if you're not working with the same definition, then you're probably not going to get the same results. If you had asked me 5 years ago how I'd describe coaching as a manager, I would have drawn an analogy from sports coaching. with the caveat that I never actually played sports outside of gym class. The image that would have come to my mind would have been of a little league baseball coach guiding a 5-year-old through learning how to hold a bat the right way through direct instruction, and then maybe standing at third base, telling them whether to run for home or wait for a better opportunity so that they can learn that through observation, just how to judge that for themselves. And that is obviously one form of coaching. And those are valid ways to learn new skills. From a leadership perspective, though, I would call that training, not coaching. In that relationship, the coach is the expert sharing their greater knowledge with a junior member of their team. And it doesn't necessarily involve a whole lot of curiosity, which you can probably guess from the title of this presentation is pretty important to our approach. That distinction between training and coaching is important because training, no matter what you call it, doesn't necessarily lead to the same outcomes that coaching leads to. Now, that doesn't make training any less valuable. It's absolutely crucial. It's just a matter of selecting the right tool for the context that you're in. So if that's not coaching, then what do I mean when I talk about coaching? I use the definition from one of the premier professional organizations for professional coaches, the International Coaching Federation. And when you see articles in like Harvard Business Review or scholarly journals about the great benefits from developing a coaching culture in your organization, they're using a definition more like this one. There we go. Okay, so the ICF defines coaching as partnering with clients in a thought-provoking and creative process that inspires them to maximize their personal and professional potential. So I don't know about you, but when I read that, it sounds, let's say, vague. So let's break that down. Partnering is about the power dynamics within that conversation. In professional coaching, the ideal is that the coach is there as an equal partner with the person that we're coaching. As a manager, that's really tricky. You're ultimately responsible for making sure that your team meets certain outcomes. And some employees are going to feel more comfortable with just being told what to do than with making decisions on their own. Some employees are carrying trauma from past toxic leaders that makes it feel really unsafe to engage with you in that way because when they've tried it before, they've gotten screamed at. But within those constraints, when can you actively listen to your employee as an expert in their specialized area? So unless you are the ILL manager, your ILL specialist is probably going to know more about the details of the back end of Iliad than you have needed to think about in a long time, if ever. Your circulation desk staff are the experts in what actually happens at the desk when you're not around. So maybe you see one image until 5 p.m. or 7 p.m. or whatever, but then, 9 until midnight, they're telling you it's totally different. They're the experts on that because they're the ones that are there. The ideal times to choose your coaching hat instead of training or some other hat you could wear as a manager is when you have room to give your team member autonomy in some area. So maybe neither of you have any choice in what outcomes they need to achieve, but when can you let them be the one to decide which path to take to get to that outcome? So if we're talking about a financial report process that has to be done the exact same way every time, that's a time for training. If we're talking about planning a story time or an outreach event, there are many different ways to reach similar outcomes. And those would be the times to lean into more of a coaching approach. The thought-provoking and creative process part is really about asking a lot of questions that are intentionally worded to provoke deeper thought on a topic. And there's a framework to follow to move through getting a better understanding of the challenge, working through the challenge, and establishing some clear next steps. So it's not just aimlessly asking any and all questions that come to mind. So, for example, Jane comes to me for advice on how to proceed on planning a big event. She's trying to decide how to select speakers to invite to present at a celebration of faculty publications at her academic library. So we've got a limited set of speakers because you're only drawing from your own faculty, but all of the politics that happen on campus. Instead of jumping in with how I would do things, I might start by asking what ideas she's already thought of, and then ask more questions to explore each of those different options, and then ask more questions that help Jane move toward a decision. Sometimes these questions lead to a whole new idea that Jane hadn't thought of before. Sometimes it helps Jane articulate a concern that has been kind of like in the back of her head, but not really well articulated until now, that leads her to discard one of those options and get more comfortable with a different one. Sometimes it gives Jane space to tell me that she needs me to be willing to do some part of it. Maybe she already reached out to some people without getting a response and feels like my position of relative authority would make it easier to get them to pay attention to the request. Whatever the outcome is, this process inspires Jane to maximize their personal and professional potential by showing that I believe Jane has already thought through this and has some great ideas to bring to the table. That communicates that I trust Jane's competence as a professional. And that builds Jane's confidence in her own abilities and Jane's trust that I'll support her choices instead of jumping in to micromanage the process. I'm there supporting Jane by helping Jane work through the challenge. Sometimes I may have information to share that would be useful for Jane to know about, but this approach trusts Jane to make the decision about what to do with that information. So that could look like, instead of, oh, you should go talk to this person about that, I might phrase it as, oh, my experience has been that this person could be a great resource, and just leave it at that, or move on to like, what's the next thing that you need to work through? Now, that's a lot to put on one conversation. Realistically, it takes longer to really build that trust. This process is specifically designed to empower those being coached, but that doesn't happen overnight. If this is reminding you of conversations with any of your past or current supervisors, put a +1 in the chat box. And if you're comfortable, how did that make you feel to work with a supervisor like that? Mhm. Oh, what's going on? I'm not seeing any responses. Are y'all responding, or am I not getting them? All right. If you're responding, I'm not getting it. I don't know what's going on. This is a new feature here. All right, so I will just move on. I could go on and on about how coaching benefits you and your team. So I'm going to limit myself to just a few here. Empowering your team members to take ownership of their work sounds great for them, but what's in it for you? More time. To be fair, you may need to invest a little more time up front to coach them and get them used to this approach. I like to say that coaching is an investment that pays dividends over time. Oop, I'm seeing the Q&A. Oh, it says chat is disabled. Thank you. I don't, we, okay. Hopefully chat's working now. Okay, so we'll try that again in just a moment. Oh, yay. Awesome. Thank you. Looks like the chat is working now. Okay, so as I was saying, developing a coaching approach is an investment upfront that pays dividends over time. When they come to you with a question like, I need help deciding how to select speakers for this event, it's a lot faster today to just suggest a solution. And that teaches your team member that the easiest way to solve problems like that in the future is to come ask you for the solution. And that means you have to come up with their solutions for them over and over and over again. When you take the time to ask what ideas they've already thought of and talk through the decision of how to proceed, they learn how to make those decisions effectively, and they learn that you trust them to be able to make those decisions that are within the scope of their work. So they don't need you to solve every little thing anymore. Of course, you'll still be there for them when they do have something they need to work through. But honestly, my experience has been that it feels a lot better to support someone as they grow as a professional and take on new challenges than it does to answer the same basic problem over and over again. And since you're asking a lot of questions, you learn more about what they actually need. So this time, put a +1 in the chat if you've ever had someone try to help you with a problem, but they didn't take time to fully listen to what you needed, so their help was actually counterproductive. Yeah, we're getting a lot of +1s here. That is really common. It comes from good intentions, but you know how important it is to pay attention to the impact. And we don't want to see this impact. Intentionally using a coaching approach helps you to slow down, ask questions, and listen so that you can actually provide the support that your team member needs. The other problem with just offering what you think they need is that it often adds more onto your plate. Here's how I can help you. And so now you have more work to do. Do you really have time to add more tasks to your workload if you're not 100% sure that that's the best way to help that situation? Sometimes what they really need is something that you can hook them up with, like a training resource or a library juice class, instead of anything that you can personally offer. And that is great news for your workload. This also helps you identify the underlying cause of problems instead of continually putting band-aids on deeper issues. So imagine you have someone closely monitoring how every person uses the staff break room, and you try to address that symptom by asking them to stop hovering and telling people the right way to load the dishwasher or whatever the issue is. So they stop doing that and they start posting signs all over the place. And yes, this is inspired by a real situation that someone I worked with dealt with. We can play whack-a-mole with symptoms until we're just burned out, or we can take the time to figure out what's behind those symptoms. In this case, it was a library that was going through a renovation, and the team felt like nobody in administration was listening to what they were trying to say about what they needed from this space. And so this person was trying to grab control any way they could. All right, so all of this combines to improve employee morale so that they feel heard and supported, which motivates people to be more engaged and collaborative and reduces those negatives like quiet quitting and turnover. Now, those were all results that you can find in the literature on using a coaching approach to leadership. I thought I'd also share some direct quotes from past participants in my intensive small group program about how adopting a coaching approach to leadership has personally benefited them. So, on this first one, the full quote is, "This program helped me develop my active listening skills, be less reactive and more reflective, and to feel less overwhelmed as a manager with a large number of direct reports." This next quote feels relevant to a lot of us in libraries who are somewhat conflict averse. "Difficult conversations and conflict more generally feel less anxiety inducing. I see them as a site of analysis rather than an uncomfortable situation that needs to be quashed immediately." And finally, this one honestly kind of surprised me. "I've become better at parsing out what is actually within my wheelhouse to solve, which has led me to have better boundaries around my time and energy." So I could go on for days about how great this is for you as leaders and how great it is for your team members. So, I mentioned in the beginning that a coaching mindset is the foundation that you build your coaching skills on top of. So, what is it? At the heart of it, adopting a coaching mindset is about embracing curiosity. As librarians, we talk a lot about encouraging lifelong learning, but for so many of us, when we step into a leadership role, our ideas about what it means to be in charge, and honestly, some of our insecurities about living up to those expectations, can override that openness. That shift into leadership can feel like taking on the responsibility for having all of the answers and taking care of our team, while also making sure that our team meets expectations in a way that reflects well on us. And that can lead to giving a lot of that sort of advice that isn't always great advice because you didn't fully listen to what they need, and feeling anxiety whenever someone on your team does something differently from how you would have done it. Adopting a coaching mindset helps you get back into a curious learning mindset. Before you assume you know what's going on or the best way to do a thing, ask yourself whether there might be more to the situation than you already know. When you lean into your curiosity, frustrating situations can become puzzles to work out. Mistakes become lessons to learn from. And explicitly adopting a coaching approach to leadership gives you permission to embrace that curiosity and let go of that pressure to have all of the answers. Focus on moving forward. This is about staying focused on how we're going to reach our goals. When you embrace curiosity for curiosity's sake, it's a lot of fun, but it's really easy to wander off on some tangent and get lost in the weeds over there. Or to do a deep dive dissection of everything that went well and every little tiny detail that went wrong in the program that you ran last week. Assessing your past programs is really useful in helping you think through how to do better next time, of course. But that deep dive can become counterproductive when you wind up beating yourself up for some little mistake or worry about assigning blame for why this thing went wrong. So, this is about staying focused on what we're trying to achieve, finding those lessons from the past that help us improve, but not getting derailed by shame, blame, or what if. Listening to your intuition, but not letting implicit biases masquerade as intuition. Of course, that means also doing the work to understand implicit biases and structural oppression. Staying fully present in the moment with the person that you're coaching. If your mind is on your meeting with your boss right after this meeting with your team member, then you're not actively listening to them and you won't be all that effective in coaching them. Acknowledging that the person that you're coaching is responsible for their own choices. That's a tough one for a lot of leaders that I work with because you want everyone on your team to thrive and succeed. And sometimes someone is going to make choices that just frustrate you. But they may be doing calculations about how to allocate their energy that include factors that you don't know about. And even if they're not, we can't embrace mistakes as lessons without allowing space for people to make mistakes and learn from the consequences of those choices. Using a coaching approach is not an alternative to consequences for bad behavior. Using a coaching approach helps you support them in developing as a professional, and it can build a relationship that makes it easier to have very clear discussions about expectations and consequences. But when you fail to follow through with the consequences that you outlined, you're withholding their opportunity to learn from a mistake. How's that one for a reframe? A lot of leaders like feel so bad about having to take that step to discipline or whatever, but that's withholding a learning lesson. And that leads to recognizing when you need to switch gears or get outside help. Using a coaching approach is great for a lot of contexts. Coaching can be used as a strategy to address performance shortcomings, but it can be even more powerful when used to support professional development. But you always need to keep more than one single tool in your toolbox. As a leader, you will still need to be able to shift into other leadership styles when someone consistently rejects coaching or has discipline issues that need to be addressed. There will be times when you realize that your employee, what they really need is more training in an area. And you'll still need to loop in HR on some issues or refer team members to your employee assistance program if you have one available as needed. But whenever you can use the coaching approach effectively, it's a really valuable tool to keep in the mix. Okay, so the coaching mindset is your foundation that helps you put these core coaching skills into practice. And practicing these skills can create a little feedback loop that strengthens your coaching mindset. So, up first, active listening is one of the most important skills. How often do you practice just actively listening to someone without getting distracted by the response that you want to make as soon as they stop talking? Put a +1 in the chat if you feel a little bit called out right now. Yeah. So thank you for those of you who are being honest. I bet a lot more people feel that way and are just not speaking up because we're not encouraged to just listen to understand all that often. We're expected to have that response right away, and that gets in the way of that active listening. In coaching, yeah, so hard. In coaching, active listening means using all of your senses, listening to the words that are being said, but also what's not being said and how they're being said, as well as paying attention to the body language of the person. If they're discussing ideas for a project, do they suddenly light up when they mention one possible way to go? Or do they shift their tone of voice in a way that feels like a 2-ton weight just got dropped on their shoulders? It's important to note that this means focusing on what's normal for that person, not how well they conform to body language norms at a cultural level. So, for example, neurodivergent folks might have body language that doesn't always fit your norms. So, if they're comfortable enough to really be themselves around you, It's important to pay attention to their baseline and watch for changes from that. So, eye contact is one of those things that's kind of a regular thing to talk about here. We think of eye contact as signaling that you're paying attention, but I know some people that if they're giving you eye contact, they absolutely are not actively listening to you. They're focused on the eye contact. So, coaches stay attentive to these shifts from each person's individual baseline, but also stay curious instead of jumping to assumptions. So instead of saying, when the person sounds like a 2-ton weight just got dropped on their shoulder, instead of saying, it sounds like you don't like that idea, a coach would respond more like, I noticed that your tone of voice shifted when you said, repeat that back. What did that bring up for you? And learning to ask effective coaching questions is another important skill. How you phrase your questions shapes the way that people are going to respond. So, good coaching questions are open ended, like a good research question, authentically curious. Yes, Ted Lasso. I love Ted Lasso. If you're going to think of a sports coach who uses a coaching approach to leadership, it's Ted Lasso. um, so, good coaching questions are open ended, authentically curious. So, they stem from an open, unbiased curiosity, not leading to a presupposed outcome. Succinct, transparent, so you don't have a hidden agenda. They're non judgmental. They're intentionally worded to bring out the, to not be leading, to not be judgmental. Um, and they're grounding. So it keeps the person in the here and now instead of ruminating on some tiny little detail or wandering off into what if land. So that's a lot of qualities to keep in mind. And it does take time to build a habit of asking these sorts of questions. We do spend a lot of time practicing this in Lead with Curiosity. Providing effective, actionable feedback is another core skill for managerial coaches. As a leader, there will be times when you need to provide feedback on performance. You may need to bring something to their attention instead of waiting for them to bring it up with you. Practicing active listening skills, including paraphrasing and reflecting back what you heard, and practicing being really intentional about asking coaching questions, builds skills for providing feedback. Within this framework, the basic formula is to share an observation, staying as non-judgmental as possible, and then ask questions. So this could sound something like, I noticed that you've missed a few deadlines on projects lately. Thankfully, they were projects with some flexibility built in, so it hasn't been a big problem, but I do want to check in with you. What's been getting in the way for you? So that's an observation. You're not in trouble right now, but I'm concerned. And here's an open-ended question. Next, I mentioned staying focused on moving forward as a trait of the coaching mindset. Actually keeping a conversation with someone else focused on moving forward is a whole other skill to build on top of that shift in your own mindset. And when coaching your team members, you will need to be mindful about balancing individual versus team interests and all of the messy interpersonal dynamics that go into the day-to-day work of leading a team while finding opportunities to use a coaching approach. So for one example, imagine you lead a department of 5 librarians. You have one individual who is a superstar in their own professional development, publications, blog posts, presentations, etc. But they're not consistently doing their part to support team projects. Maybe they're even consistently dropping the ball on their parts. As an external coach working with an individual, I can focus on identifying their personal goals and then support their success and doing things that will best support their personal goals without even really asking how it affects their team. The only way that becomes relevant for me is if one of their goals is to move into a management position, in which case those interpersonal dynamics become directly relevant. As their leader, though, you have a responsibility to the team to make sure that everyone is contributing equitably. If you don't address this issue, then there's a risk that other members of your team are going to become resentful of the imbalance or take this as an indication that they also are free to neglect the team projects in favor of the work they prefer doing, or both. Both is always an option. And that makes this a really important skill to develop. All right, so this has been a lot of information, and most of it from sort of the airplane at cruising altitude perspective. So, what are some really small ways to start to implement this approach? Here's one example scenario that I have permission to share, and the names are made up, of course. So, a manager described an incident like this. I had two direct reports working at the circulation desk and noticed that a line of students was building up. Pat was engaged in a conversation with a student about a book, while Alex was busy dealing with everyone in the lineup. The conversation became quite long, and I was concerned that Alex was doing more of the work. Additionally, Alex doesn't always voice the issues for themselves until they boil over to being overwhelmed. And they asked how to handle Pat not paying attention to the line from a coaching approach. So the manager started off with the same steps that I'd suggest. Jump in to help get the line taken care of, and then ask Pat to have a private chat away from the desk. And this is where the challenges of managing make coaching difficult. If you need to be as quick as absolutely possible about addressing this so that Pat can get back out to the desk as soon as possible, the fastest solution is to describe the observed behavior and tell Pat the behavior you'd rather see. Hey, Pat, I need you to jump in and help with the line when it starts backing up like that. To approach that as a coach takes a little bit more time. You know why you were concerned about the balance of work between Alex and Pat, but you don't know Pat's perspective yet. One way to open that coaching conversation would be, I noticed that you were engaged in a long conversation with one student while a line of other students was building up. What was going on there? So that described the observation without passing judgment, and then asked an open-ended, non-judgmental question. Being external to the situation, I can picture a range of responses that would all lead to different approaches. Maybe Pat has ADHD that causes them to hyperfixate on what they're doing and honestly just not notice the long line. If Pat is new to this work, especially if Pat's a student employee, maybe they thought they were going above and beyond expectations to provide really excellent support to the one student without having the experience to balance that with the needs of those other students. Maybe Pat was trying to end the conversation, but the other student just would not stop talking. And Pat was afraid of getting into trouble for being rude if they said, hey, I really have to go help. Maybe they were having an absolutely shitty day and they didn't notice the line because every bit of their focus was on keeping themselves from crying at the desk. I can go on all day coming up with different stories to explain that behavior, but I don't actually know what's going on until I ask. Once you hear Pat's perspective on what was going on, then that will determine where to go from there. If they thought they were going above expectations by providing amazing service to the one student, then taking some time to clarify expectations is going to lead to a better outcome than just telling them that you need them to pay attention to the line. If they were trapped by that patron that I'm sure everyone who has worked a desk has experienced that just will not stop talking, then helping them build strategies for putting someone on hold in a welcoming, friendly, caring way will do more to solve the problem than just telling them the behavior that you want to see. And if they're just barely keeping it together, then they probably don't need you to correct them. They know they're not doing their best and they just need a little compassion today so that they can come back tomorrow and do better. And while this scenario focused really heavily on addressing Pat's behavior, because that's what the manager who asked it was concerned about, as a team coach, how do you support Alex in learning to ask for help before they reach that boiling point? Effective communication and being able to ask for support when needed are important job skills. So those are also appropriate topics to coach an employee on. Okay, so how do you put this into action in your own work? One really simple first step is to focus in on that active listening. Give yourself 30 seconds to be curious before jumping into a response. Think about what assumptions you're making when you jump to that piece of advice that you first want to give them. And what don't you absolutely know for sure about the context that you could ask about? Another small change that people I've worked with have had success with was to restructure their one-to-one meetings with their reports to start with just asking an open-ended question about how their work is going, and then intentionally just asking more genuinely curious, interested, non-judgmental questions about it for the first full 10 minutes, and then shift into their regular agenda. So one possible short script for opening that could sound something like, before we get into our regular updates, I'd like to try something a little different. I've been working on some leadership development lately and realized I can sometimes give advice that isn't always the best fit for the situation. So, how would you feel about taking just 10 minutes to just talk through whatever you're focusing on this month without me jumping in to tell you what to do? And then see where I can help from there. Another strategy is to find a critical friend, which is someone who will challenge you to think critically and consider other perspectives on a challenging situation. And talking with them can be an incredibly valuable way to help you embrace your curiosity more often. Okay, so this has been a lot of information in quick overview formats. I hope you learned enough to feel like this was a valuable use of your time, but there's only so much detail we can get into in just an hour, especially if we want to leave room for questions. So here are a few ways that you can learn more, organized from the lowest to highest level of individual attention and support. First, sign up for the Coaching Librarian newsletter, which is completely free. If you check that box on the registration form, then I'll add you as soon as I get that report. Otherwise, you can visit leadwithcuriosity.org/newsletter to sign up. About every other week, I send out a newsletter discussing some topic related to using a coaching approach to leadership. It's not like a structured course, but it does help you bring in a small little component over time, taking baby steps. The next option would be to sign up for my new mini course, Cultivate Curiosity. That's currently on an introductory rate of only $25. This is a series of emails that does a deep dive into the coaching mindset using the components outlined by the International Coaching Federation and translating them to a library leadership perspective. You get one intro email about an hour after signing up, and then one email each Monday for 8 weeks that includes specific ideas for how you can start to adopt that part of the coaching mindset. Even if you never go any further into learning coaching skills, just practicing these mindset shifts will help you embrace your curiosity and improve your relationships with your team members. The next step up is my Library Juice course, Coaching as a Leadership Skill. I didn't include a link there because it's a lot longer, and I'm sure they'll be happy to include that in the follow-up email after this session when you get the replay. That's a 4-week, fully asynchronous course. Past participants have commented on the course survey that we have the most engaging discussion boards they've ever experienced. So it's asynchronous, but it's not the sort of discussion boards most people think of. The next session of this is coming up in July. And finally, I offer a more intensive program live via Zoom. And I started doing that because of feedback on the Library Juice class, because some people wanted to take that next step further. The next session is a summer intensive format. We start with a 4-day jumpstart in July. We meet for an hour and a half each day on Zoom, but then have about 3 hours of homework each day, which makes it feel pretty intense to me. Meetings include some discussion plus active learning exercises leading into actually practicing coaching one another by the end of the Jumpstart week. After that July Jumpstart, we'll have twice monthly meetings from August through October to support you in really building new habits and working through any challenges that come up in actually using this coaching approach with your team. And those who jump all the way into signing up for this program will get the Cultivate Curiosity course for free. And I do offer a discount for those who enroll after having taken the Library Juice class. There are 2 different options for the summer jumpstart to accommodate UK and North American time zones in the 3rd and 4th weeks of July. And you can get all of the details and register today at leadwithcuriosity.org. And finally, I'm going to drop a link in the chat where you can enter to win a free individual coaching session with me so you can experience being on the other side and being the one being coached. You drop that in there right quick. In a free coaching session, I focus entirely on coaching you through something that you're currently dealing with, not trying to make a sale. This isn't like being invited to hear about a timeshare. Okay, so I warned you at the beginning that I'd be asking this. How are you going to take at least one baby step over the next week toward actually putting some of this into practice? If you feel up to it, go ahead and pop that in the chat. To remind myself to listen, I plan to put a drawing of an ear in front of me. Oh, that's awesome. Active listening is what I need to focus on. Restructure my you, me meetings with my staff to start with a coaching question. That's awesome. All right. I've got my email up here, and the website is leadwithcuriosity.org. I'm happy to answer any questions you have here while we have time. And if there's something we don't get to, feel free to email me. Um, if you are interested in learning more about any of this, even if it's like talking through which option you might be interested in, I am happy to schedule a free, no obligation, no pressure, anything consultation to chat on Zoom one-to-one. So yeah, and I'm going to stop sharing and check on, are there any questions in the Q&A tab that you saw, Sophie, that weren't about chat not working? Let me look at that. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's all about the chat. All right. Anybody have any questions? Couple more answers. Slow down and listen closely. Deborah, I think I've seen you in another webinar before, so thanks for coming again. Darian, since I'm not a supervisor, I'm going to start by practicing asking myself good coaching questions. That is awesome. And I talk a lot about coaching as a leader, but one, leaders aren't only those in management positions. If you are leading a committee, you're in a leadership position. If you are that person that welcomes the new junior employee and goes out of your way to support and provide some mentorship, that's leadership. So it's not just formal leaders, and self-coaching is actually a thing. So that's very valid. Do you have a series of typical questions to start a coaching session? So there are some scripts out there that you can use as a way to kind of get started. Um, I don't have them in my head right at this moment, but something open-ended, like what's going on in what are you struggling with in this project, or what's the next challenge you need to work through on this project, or and I'm saying this project because that would apply to, planning a story time, planning a publication, planning any sort of thing that takes time and thought, right? Um, what's the next challenge you need to work through, and planning this can open up a conversation. One thing I will do is not assume what they're thinking or feeling based on what I see, but instead ask them, that's awesome, thank you. Your recommended first step for a new leader to do. So can you say a little bit more for a new leader to do in developing a coaching approach, or when you first start in your role? To set a positive tone with the group they're leading. So reading that, I'm assuming when you are first starting out in a new leadership role, to come in, what's the first step to set that positive tone with the group that you're leading? Ask a lot of questions. A lot of new leaders come in and feel insecure and want to show that, yes, I am qualified for this job. You made a good hire. And demonstrating your knowledge is less important than demonstrating your curiosity. Take time to ask them questions about what they do and why they do it. I want to understand every little detail and I want to understand what's important to you. And I want to understand what you're frustrated with, what you wish we could change. Um, Kind of the generic advice that I feel like has permeated the leadership development field is you should not make any drastic changes in your first 6 months unless like there's something that's really like illegal or dangerous going on because you need to come in and learn and listen and find out what's going on there and focus on building that trust. Um, and you do that by listening. And that feels so simplistic, but sometimes simple is the best way. Thank you. All right. Any other questions? All right. I would love to hear from all of you. Like I said at the beginning, I feel like an evangelist. I feel like coaching, developing this coaching approach, leaning into your curiosity, practicing active listening would go so far to make things better for library workers. It doesn't fix cuts to the IMLS. It doesn't fix the people wanting to ban books. It doesn't fix stuff from outside, but it can improve what's going on inside. And if we can get to where we are all working together towards shared goals against those forces instead of fighting one another within the library, that would be absolutely amazing to me.